Hello and welcome back to another edition of GNAT-TV's In-Depth series. I'm Andrew McKeever, the news director at GNAT-TV's News Project. It's a pleasure to have you with us today on Friday, February 3rd. Today, we're going to have a conversation with the leadership of the Rural Caucus in the Vermont legislature. The Rural Caucus is a tripartisan group of over 50 members in the Vermont House of Representatives who collaborate and work together to support Vermont's rural communities and economy. We're really pleased today to be joined by Representative Lisa Hango. She is a Republican who represents the Franklin 5 district. That includes the towns of Franklin, Berkshire, Highgate, and Richford. Also, great to have back with us again Representative Laura Sibilia. She is an independent who represents the Wyndham 2 district, which includes the towns of Dover, Wardsboro, Jamaica, Stratton, and Somerset. Representatives Hango and Sibilia, thank you very much for making the time for being with us today.
Thank you, Andrew. It's great to be back and great to have
my
colleague, Lisa.
Yes, indeed. Great to meet you, Representative Hango. Thank you very much for making the time for this conversation, just to have us hear about what the Rural Caucus does and what you both see as the sort of the major issues facing Vermont's rural community. There's been a lot of discussion about that recently. And so, Representative Sibilia, let me start with you. In general, from the 30,000-foot level, what do you see as some of the major issues that are facing Vermont's small towns and communities these days?
So great question. And I'm happy to report, I think there's a tremendous amount of consensus across state government, across parties, both in the administration and with the governor's staff, that in this moment, we have an urgent need to help our communities that don't have administrative capacity to realize the opportunity that is available with the federal funding that has come in, both through the pandemic, funding that can help communities be more resilient, as well as funding that has come in through other federal programs around climate change adaptation, around infrastructure development, and our smallest, most rural communities often do not have administrative staff that can even research these grants, never mind put together the project and or apply for it. And then there's implementation, something that is different in Vermont than a lot of other states. There's really no county level government, which is not something I'm here today advocating for. We do have some really strong key regional capacity in our regional planning commissions and our regional development corporations. But nonetheless, there are a lot of needs in our rural communities to adapt, as I said, to climate change, to a digitization of our economy, to the housing needs, to the workforce shortage. And so there's some consensus around the need for capacity. The governor put forward actually some funding for that in the Budget Adjustment Act. The speaker, this kind of moved really quickly. The speaker supported work to get some more detail around how that emergency funding might happen so that we could pass it out of the House. And we did that today. And so I think there'll be continuing conversation in the Senate. And hopefully we will see some funding to help communities in this immediate moment work with the opportunities that are available right now. There's a tremendous amount of funding and project development, hopefully in March or April. There are a number of other issues, but I think that is, Representative Hango would agree that we've found tremendous consensus on that point.
Well, Representative Hango, over to you then. What do you see as some of the major issues that are kind of on the front burner when it comes to helping Vermont's rural towns?
I definitely see a lack of capacity. And the first thing that I noticed when I got into state government about 5 years ago was just my observations from being involved in my communities. A lack of volunteerism, and most small communities depend on volunteers. And if you're not volunteer, you're really not getting paid very much. It's a very small stipend. So just about everybody is volunteer. And over again, the same people are doing the same jobs throughout our rural communities. And people are getting older. I've been doing these types of community positions for 30 years, and people are getting burned out. The younger generation, unfortunately, is not stepping up in a way that we would hope they would, but they're facing a lot of economic challenges that perhaps we did not face when we were their ages. So I truly believe that adding some administrative capability to help with technical issues in our towns is really going to be the impetus that propels our towns forward into the future. And by that, I just mean, simple technical assistance, such as actually combing through all the grants that are available out there for small towns, for any town. And once those grants are identified, having community meetings, maybe getting together with neighboring communities to make sure that we're taking advantage of the grants that are out there for towns. Some communities may not be aware of what's available to them, particularly if they team up with a neighboring district. Jobs are really hard to come by in some rural areas. Some of us have lost manufacturing, and there hasn't been anything to step into its place. Unfortunately, the pandemic has caused what we call, the Great Resignation. So many of our citizens are not working still to this day. They found other things in life that they prioritize other than having a full-time job. So we're lacking workforce and we're lacking jobs. It's like a double whammy, right? And also, I would be neglectful if I didn't mention the housing crisis. It looks different in rural areas than it does in more urban areas, for sure. And I can only really attest to my own district, where housing is pretty plentiful, but some of it may not be up to speed, up to code. Some of it may be vacant for various reasons. So to rehab those places and bring them back online for folks to rent or buy is crucial. So those are the big things. Oh, also, I had noted lack of access to medical care, to public safety services. All of those institutions are really seriously suffering from a workforce shortage. And until we can fix some of our other problems, we cannot even begin to offer the amount of services to people that we need to really live our lives and live really far out. And by that, I live a mile from the Canadian border, surrounded by farmland. So, we have to drive a great distance for any services that we might need.
You mentioned, you mentioned several areas and issues that I'd love to drill down a little more deeply into. And I know you also have a piece of legislation, the omnibus bill, that perhaps will address some of those. But before we get to that, there was one question, I guess, Representative Hango, I'd like to stick with you for a moment and ask you to build upon something you said in the course of your last answer there. And that's still a question of younger residents. You mentioned that, a lot of the younger residents in your towns weren't stepping forward to kind of, run for select board or whatever, or be on the school board, do that sort of thing. But as I'm sure you're aware, there's been a lot of concern expressed about the fact that there aren't as many younger folks, period, living in the towns, in rural areas across the entire state. And I guess I just wondered, what do you think it's going to take? And then Representative Sibilia, I'm going to ask you the same question, to attract younger residents to either remain in the towns where they grew up, or move back, or come from other areas.
This is something I'm pretty passionate about. So in my district, I'm quite fortunate. We're quite fortunate that many young people remain. They may go away to college or trade school, but they tend to return home. We're a district of really old, traditional, large farm families. So they tend to have a number of relatives who are still in the area and want to settle there. So in that respect, we're fortunate. We did not see the extreme influx of young people moving in during the pandemic that other parts of the state did, but we certainly had a number of folks who moved in for that reason and who are hopefully staying. My passion really is students, and I have been part of legislation that has encouraged students to stay in the state after they graduate. So for certain professions, we've offered in the past few years scholarship opportunities that turn into loan forgiveness if they stay in the state for a certain number of years to practice what they went to school here for. So I see that as a great way of encouraging people who come to Vermont, probably first off because they think Vermont is such a wonderful place to be, and they do learn to love it and want to stay here. And this is just another tool in the toolbox to help them stay. So I'd like to see more opportunities like that. We're also offering opportunities like that to our National Guard folks when they serve in Vermont, and they can get their tuition reimbursed and hopefully will stay with us when, as they move up in their career, because more often than not, they bring families with them and they settle here and the kids are going to school here. And they get embedded into the community, and we really want to encourage them in any way that we can for them to stay in the state with us.
Representative Sibilia?
So, I think Representative Hango touched on one of the issues in her first responses around housing. So housing is really important for the folks that want to come here, want to stay here. I have kids that are here that, that are married and, are having a hard time purchasing their first home, both work full time. And so that's certainly something that we're taking up here this year. In Dover, the town that I live in, we did see a tremendous influx of population during COVID. Dover is it's predominantly second homes in Dover. I believe it's 1/5 residential, 4/5 second homes. We had a number of folks. I like to call those folks weekend residents or future Vermonters because that is, in fact, a lot of them what they are. And when we see climate change, when we see issues of instability or political strife, I think folks see this as an area that is great for raising families, where we are able to still talk to each other largely. One of the great things about our rural caucus, it is nonpartisan, and we see that throughout Vermont. As we continue to build out our broadband infrastructure. And Andrew, I know you were a founding member of the CUD in your neck of the woods. The CUDs are doing tremendous work throughout the state. As we see that being built out, I think that will also be helpful for folks to stay and also to come here. My kids can work anywhere in the world, and so they get to choose where they want to live. And so they need housing, they need the ability to be connected, and they need community, and so those are things that we're all focused on in our caucus with our group and beyond.
So, yeah, and I wanted to ask you a bit about your caucus and what it does. And I gather you seem to meet basically once a week or so, or fairly regularly. And I gather you've also endorsed a bill, this omnibus bill. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about what's in that. I gather things like, well, like broadband and emergency services and policing, and also trying to help the agricultural sector or parts of it. But I'll let you unpack it for us. So tell us what's the status of the bill and its likelihood of getting to the governor's desk this session.
Sure. So the omnibus bill this is our second omnibus bill. The way that an omnibus means it has a number of different ideas in it. And this is the second one that has been created by the Rural Caucus. The process we use to create that, we ask members to bring forward ideas. What is the problem that they are trying to solve, and how it might be solved for rural Vermont. This year, I believe we had 33 proposals that were brought forward, and we asked members to vote for their top. It was 5, I believe, right, Lisa? And
Yes.
We ended up with the top 10. We put into this omnibus bill. The highest vote count went to a bill that Representative Hango and Representative Sims and I had been working on, which kind of takes this rural capacity, this urgent rural capacity that the governor and others have been supporting moving quickly with this Budget Adjustment Act, and takes a step further and says we need to think kind of short-term, mid-term, and longer-term about this issue of rural capacity. Lisa, I don't know if you have the list open.
I do.
Okay.
What can I help you with?
Could talk. Yes, maybe you could just talk about the other items that are in there. These are the top 10 vote getters.
Sure. The second top vote getter, and no surprise here, is emergency medical services stabilization. Something that's so important to our rural areas. So that's also included in that bill. The third one is rural workforce housing. That was brought by Representative Sims. After that is a trades education feeder program. And that's really important because a lot of our students do not live near a tech center, and to travel to one is really not time effective. So this would be a feeder program where high schools could have their own like little mini tech program. And if students are interested at some point, they would go to their larger tech center if they wanted to. The fifth one is disaster mitigation and community resilience infrastructure funding. And the next one is regional small business assistance. Did you want to say anything more about that, since that's your bill, Laura? That was your bill idea?
That builds off work that the regional development corporations did during COVID to provide technical match businesses with technical assistance providers. So, and it was tremendously successful throughout the state.
Thank you. The seventh top vote getter was right to repair agricultural equipment. And there is just some glitch that manufacturers are not required in any way to repair this equipment if it should break down. And our farms are being left without places to go to get repairs. So that's really important to our rural areas, particularly my area, which is huge on farming. The next one is state funding for Meals on Wheels. Meals on Wheels is now funded by the federal government and doesn't quite make it to cover the costs. So this is a really important service for people who may not see anybody for days on end unless a Meals on Wheels volunteer comes to their house with a meal. So this is really crucial for people with disabilities and senior citizens, older Vermonters who live on their own in rural areas. The ninth one is a rural charging infrastructure, and that's for electric vehicles. That's your bill, Representative Sibilia. Anything you want to say about that?
Pretty straightforward, making sure that we are installing Charging infrastructure in our rural areas.
And that's high efficiency or quick charging or just any
multiple. Yes.
Okay, great. I could not remember the details of that. And the last one is prioritizing village water infrastructure. So that is important if we're going to have any infill development in our small town downtowns. You can't be digging multiple septic tanks all over the place, building multiple private septic systems. A lot of times the soil just doesn't, or the geography just doesn't allow for it. So in order to promote more dense housing and development in downtown areas, this is a good way of going about it. So those are our top 10. They go into a rural omnibus bill, and our legislative council is working on the various pieces of it because it touches on all different committees of jurisdiction. So the language has to fit together. The statutes have to get knitted together. And then it will come to us, and we will get more bill sponsors, and it will be introduced on the House floor eventually, sometime before February 21st, right?
Yes. Yeah. And all of the ideas will also be introduced individually, which will make it easier for committees to take them up.
So the idea is that,
and I think most of the I think most of the other 23 ideas are going in as standalone bills as well.
Yeah, I see that there are a couple of ideas that didn't make it into the top 10. I gather Representative Sims wanted to have something about supporting working lands and outdoor recreation. But maybe
interesting that you should mention that, because the omnibus recreation bill was just sent to legislative drafting on the very last day. They were able to pull together all the recreation ideas.
So would all these ideas, or these top 10 or whatever winds up being in the bill, would they be funded through the ARPA monies, the federal monies, or would these be
it'd be various, depending, these will all need additional policy build out in committees, and a reminder that we're at the beginning of a 2-year biennium. So the items that we're introducing as part of this omnibus and standalones will have up to this year and next year to pass. So I think it will depend on which policies we're talking about.
So I was just wondering, it's fascinating to me. Your caucus is a tripartisan caucus, and all parties are represented. How does that work? Are you all able to kind of talk together and find common ground, even though you may be approaching some of these problems from different perspectives?
A lot of times we, in general, we agree on that there's a problem, on the problems. And so, it's just how we come together in the bigger legislative body, on the solutions. And in the rural areas, we've got an additional factor working for us. We agree there's a problem, and we're from rural areas. So, I think being able to work together to find solutions, it comes a little faster. We use the democratic process, right? So with our omnibus bill, we floated all these ideas, and we're moving forward with the ones that received the most votes. And, cannot say enough about how much we appreciate. We were really intentional this year, wanting to make sure we've always had, it's always been a tripartisan caucus, but it's not always had tripartisan leadership. And so thrilled that Representative Hango agreed to join the leadership of this. She is also a chair of the National Guard and Veterans Affairs Caucus, and which is also nonpartisan. So it's been terrific having that leadership. So we kind of steer away from super hot spots in our leadership meetings, and bring issues that are really shared by the largest cross section of our group. And I would definitely invite Lisa to say her own thing.
Thank you. I just want to say that I really appreciate being asked to step into this role. It's been tremendous for me coming in as a minority. I felt like I wasn't sure I was going to have a voice that was heard. And nothing but people listening to me since I stepped into this role, which was in mid-December, late December. So that's been a really pleasant surprise for me. I shouldn't be surprised, though, because Laura serves as one of the co-chairs with me on the National Guard and Veterans Affairs Caucus. And we have always been able to work really well together there as a Democrat, an independent, and a Republican working together on that caucus. So that gave me the confidence that we could make this work as well. I'd been a member of the Rural Caucus for a few years and attended meetings and really liked the subject matter. It was always interesting to me. It was always relevant, whereas sometimes in committee, it's not always relevant to my really rural district. So this has been a place for me to learn and grow and advocate, and I've really enjoyed it so far. I mean, we're only in week 5, so we'll see how it goes. But I think we just overcame a really big hurdle. We worked with the administration and with our Democrat partners, majority party partners, to get a $3 million allocation in the Budget Adjustment Act for rural infrastructure assistance, which is what I was talking about earlier, the technical assistance piece. So that went through the House, passed on its final vote this morning as part of the larger bill, and is going on to the Senate for their input. So to me, that feels like a win, and I'm very excited about that.
Well, we're just about out of time, and there was one more question I would love to ask you both, but it's one that would require an answer that would take us way too long, I think. But I'll just throw it out there. I guess I just wonder, do you ever get pushback from your colleagues who are from more urban districts, like from Burlington or Rutland or even Bennington, let's say, who say, well, yeah, but we also have issues and problems too, and we need support. Do you all work together around that, or is there this sort of cultural divide where, larger towns and cities in Vermont versus small towns, it's hard to find sort of an agreement to help each other or work together?
So I will say that it has always been my sense that all of our communities have distinct needs. Our largest communities have needs that are not like most of our other communities, and they need to be addressed and met and heard by our legislative body. And our smallest communities, that is the same. So, in fact, we have members from Chittenden County that and some of our larger communities that have been on the Rural Caucus and sit on there to make sure that they understand the issues that we have. And I think this is just a helpful way. It's a way for us to be helpful with the House and say, okay, well, it may work that way. Doing it this way may work great for 90% of Vermont, but the 10% of the most rural Vermonters are going to need this kind of modification or this additional detail. So we're working it out. We work it out.
All right. Well, I'm sure there's much more we could talk about on all of this, but I want to thank you both for making the time for this conversation. I know you all have to get to other meetings, I'm sure, real quick. So I will just say again, thank you for being with us. Thank you for helping us learn more about the work of your caucus. And to all of our viewers, thank you for sharing part of your day with us. Hope you found our program interesting, and we'll see you again the next time. Have a great day.